Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, a conversation through the careers of writer Simon Furman and artist Andrew Wildman. Recollections and revelations about the highs and the lows as creatives in comics, books, games, film and TV. Here we are again.
And you're in the Patreon subscribers only bit of our 24th podcast.
Yeah, where all the cool people hang out.
Exactly. And we're going to be talking later about Regeneration One and, some of the things that we're going to make available exclusively to you wonderful Patreon subscribers.
Because you deserve something. You deserve more than you get.
Yes.
Well, actually, I don't know about that. You do get a lot. You get to see our faces as part of the podcast.
Yeah.
You get it earlier and you get extra content. But there's more.
Because we're talking about Regeneration One. I actually have a much better archive of Regeneration One material from the very early stages. So we're going to make all that available. Stuff we're going to talk about in the main podcast. You subscribers will get visuals and stuff to read.
Yeah, we'll do that. Not entirely sure how we'll do that, but we'll do it as a download for you. We'll give you a link, or we'll post it on a patron only sort of section of the website or whatever. But one way or another, you'll have exclusive access to that.
Good. And we're starting to get into a bit of the podcast where we're going to have much more shareable material because I still have all this stuff.
Yeah.
I've got lots of lovely sort of pencil art from Andrew and Jeff and Guido that we can share, and various other progressional bits of the whole Regeneration One era.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a lot of that is because it's more recent, and so we probably haven't moved house many times since all that happened. Another because we're massively in the digital age, so storing stuff is also a lot easier than it was, which is why we found it hard to find anything from back in the day. But given that we're getting nearer, Leslie, my wife, said to me this morning, she said, "Oh, you're doing another podcast?" "Yes." "What are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, we're doing Regeneration One now. It should be really interesting." She said, "Well, that's not very long ago. What are you going to talk about when you get up to date?"
Don't know. But
we'll just start from the beginning again.
Yes, well, I think we skipped through some. I mean, it was with our special guest, who, of course, you Patreon listeners, viewers know is going to be Ian Rimmer. I did some draft ideas for questions and stuff we were going to talk about, and of course, there's a whole level of depth we never really got into on those early Marvel UK days that we can revisit.
Yeah, no, that would be really good.
We can regenerate even.
Oh, look what you did there.
So, yeah, that we can sort of backtrack a little bit, and we can always take requests from you Patreon subscribers for things you'd like to revisit, areas you'd like us to discuss. We can open it up also to more Q&A questions. And we can generally, I think we can probably go back and forth over this pretty much ad infinitum.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good when people ask questions because it reminds us of things that we didn't even know we'd forgotten.
Yes. Yeah, and we're relying on Ian's memory as well on our 25th podcast.
I think that's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well, he will bring some real stuff I'm not sure I know of the very early parts of Transformers UK.
Yeah, because it is odd to think that there was a time before this all existed.
Yes.
It's just so much part of the fabric of the universe now, isn't it, Transformers, that to hear from somebody who was there right at the very beginning, I think it'd be really good.
I think it would be. So shall we get cracking on Regeneration One? Lots to talk about. Probably won't just be this one podcast.
Yeah, because it was quite a project, wasn't it? When bigger than we thought it would be. We'll get into that in the
Mm.
podcast. But yeah, I'm sure we can get two out of this because there was a lot of stuff that happened before,
Oh yeah.
during, and after it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And right down to the fact that at one point you had to step away from it and sort of come back at the end.
I did, didn't I? I'll see if I can remember before we get to that bit. I'll see if I can remember
Yes.
why.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it was just you were busy on other things,
Yeah,
but yeah, we'll have to see if, I doubt we'll get to that stage yet. This is very much almost pretty much we're going to be talking about the build up to and release of Regeneration One.
yeah, fabulous. All right, who's
Great.
introducing and what episode number is it?
24, and I'm introducing.
Oh, okay, that's good. Yeah, excellent. Okay, go. Press the button.
Hello, welcome to episode 24 of The Rest is Giant Robots. I'm Simon Furman.
And I'm Andrew Wildman, and we're not going to tell you what we do
No, because if you
because
don't
you know.
know by now, you never will.
No.
Good. Okay, well, we've saved ourselves a few seconds there and we can jump straight in. We're going to be talking today about Regeneration One, which was the continuation of the original Marvel Transformers series, which finished with issue 80. So,
Mm,
Regeneration One, we're going to take you through the somewhat tortuous route to Regeneration One in a minute. But this was basically picking up all the loose ends, things we had to condense, didn't do, when suddenly we realized the original Marvel comic was finishing in a matter of issues. We had to wrap things up and
mm,
leave other things dangling. So Regeneration One was our chance to finish it properly.
mm, mm. And it was a huge. It was a huge opportunity, a huge privilege, really. After all those years, like if it would have happened fairly early, if the book had never been cancelled, the Marvel book, then great, that would have been awesome. We'd have carried on for a while. If it had been cancelled and 5 years later somebody had said, "Oh, do you want to carry on?" We probably would have both said no because we were doing other things straight away. But that amount of time on and everything that had happened in between with conventions and all
Mm.
that stuff, it was like, yeah, this would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. If we could, it would have A, clashed with Generation 2 a little bit because
Yeah.
Generation 2 actually was a slight continuation of Generation 1. There's very much a
Mhm.
sort of quick recap of what happened in the original Generation 1 in Generation 2. So that was slightly a thing we had to do a run around really with Regeneration One, but we'll talk about that later.
Mm.
So let's take you back to, well, the earliest mention I can find of what became Regeneration One was way back in November 2009.
Okay.
And if you figure Regeneration One didn't come out till 2012, that there was quite a lot of pre stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think I had, off my own back or with in concert with you, just pitched an idea to IDW at the time.
Right.
You know, at that point, I was still very much flat out on, escalation, devastation, and all the other series that were running. So it wasn't like I was desperate for more work, but this was obviously something that had come up as, hey, maybe we could get the gang back together and do
Mm.
something here. And I think the editor at the time on the Transformers line was Andy Schmidt.
Hmm.
And we or I or both of us, I think we must have discussed it, pitched him an idea that just was loosely called Transformers Forever.
It's not ringing
Okay.
any bells with
No,
me, but
okay,
it
yeah,
doesn't mean it's not real. Yeah.
I've got the documents,
Okay.
and it was less a story. It was more a pitch. It really wasn't more, issue by issue at this stage.
Hmm.
And Transformers Forever, I think, was just a sort of code name for it.
Right.
And underneath was this idea of a 5-issue series called The War to End All Wars,
That sounds familiar.
which was going to be the wrap up of the proper wrap up of the original Marvel comic.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I pitched this to Andy. Now, obviously, nothing much happened with it at the originally the Transformers Forever document, and it's worth pointing out at this point we have all this stuff, or I have all this material, all the original early pitches and eventual story breakdowns, which
Mm.
we're going to make available to our Patreon subscribers exclusively. So if you support us and this podcast, there's going to be a wealth of nice material, downloadable material to collect at the end of these couple of episodes.
Nice one. A good one for our dedicated supporters. Yeah.
Quite
If,
so.
if you're not a
And
paying subscriber, now's your opportunity to jump in and grab this stuff.
yeah, absolutely. And to support us, we're happy to do this podcast. We enjoy it, but it's nice to think of it as a motivational thing and that we have people who are willing to support this venture of ours as well. So
Mm,
if you can, join the Patreon subscribers and you'll get all these extras plus the video version.
mm, yeah. Good one. So 2009, I'm trying to remember what I was doing then, but yeah, that is quite a run up, isn't it? To,
It is. I mean, it's quite a long time, and I know I was fairly full on with, I think it's before Matt Hatter even.
yeah, don't know. Yeah, I was
And
probably working in, I might have been working in games then. I can't remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have a feeling so. And maybe it was just something we talked about, you and I said, oh, I'll send a pitch in and we'll see what happens.
Mm,
And I think the long and short of it is nothing much happened at that point.
mm,
And then I think later Andy came back to me and said, well, okay, let's develop that. Or it just trundled along gently in the background. And we finally got to what was going to be a 5-issue series, possibly with the last issue being double-sized.
right. Yeah.
And that was called The War to End All Wars,
Yeah.
which was definitely what I'd envisioned, and strangely what, well, not strangely because I probably just took the title, but that's what we called the final arc of Regeneration One,
Oh,
The War
okay.
to End All Wars.
Yeah.
But yeah, that became a 5-issue story outline around about March 2010.
Yeah. Okay. That's getting closer.
Yeah, so that slightly is ticks it along a bit, but again, considering it wouldn't see print until 2 years or more later.
Mm,
It's kind of there was a long bit in between that I had to dig deep into my old blog, which thankfully still exists, to
okay.
see what the progression was. And I'd forgotten that the first, if you like, instigating event was Larry Hama and IDW launching G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero as a
Right.
continuation of the Marvel run.
Yeah.
And that happened in late 2010, I think, or early 2011.
Mm,
So there was a precedent. And I think once that precedent was there, and obviously that sold well, and there was that retro market, I think that's when we got more or less greenlit to do Regeneration One.
mm. And there had been a campaign, hadn't there, by fans for a long
Oh,
time called
yes.
Transformers
Yeah,
81 or whatever. Yeah. I'm
that,
sure you were
that's
going to get
right.
onto that, but
Yeah, no, 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 you're absolutely right. That's exactly what happened next. I did a Q&A on the IDW forum, which
mm,
again, I'd forgotten there was a forum that I routinely supplied content for. And it was a Q&A developed by the IDW lot. And one of the questions was, would you like to do a continuation of the
Mm,
original Marvel series. So I talked about that and said, oh, we've got ideas. It was probably still a 5 issue War to End All Wars story at this point.
mm,
But yeah, that forum generated, not only did it generate it generated a petition.
mm.
The comic site Newsarama picked up on that and started a campaign more or less to bring the comic back, to make
Uh,
this happen. So there was an online petition that got quite a few thousand votes
mm.
to bring back the original Marvel comic in a new series in the way that a real American hero had done.
Yeah. Yeah, and because there was so much nostalgia. Yeah, I remember that campaign. I think it was called Transformers 81, wasn't it? As
Mm,
in it was
yeah.
cancelled at 80, and we need to carry on with this thing. And I can well imagine that Larry wanting to do a G.I. Joe continuation would have got legs. So well done, Larry, because that
Mm.
would have given some interest. But hey, so in an alternate universe, I'd have been doing both books.
Yes, yeah, that would have been hilarious. Well, it wouldn't have been good in a way. It would have been terrible if you'd been grabbed for a real American hero, because again, we might not have got Regeneration One.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah. So all of that, I guess, was going on in the background before I heard anything about it. I think I knew about the campaign,
Mm.
um, but the first I remember anything about it happening, we'd probably toyed with that idea, but I didn't really know much about it. But the first I remember anything about it was after, I think we said this before, after I did those six um, covers for Transformers. What did they call it? Transformers Series 2 or something. Those
Ye
IDW covers.
yes.
Yeah, where I did the, Prime, Megatron, Bumblebee,
Mm.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and that was I wasn't initially interested in even doing those, but when they asked me, because it was going to be single character. I mean, basically, cynically, I thought, well, these would make nice prints, or just nice pieces of art on the wall. So yeah, I'll do these. This will be fine. And it was after that I guess it was Andy said to me, would you be interested in doing any interior work? And I said, not really. And he said, what would it take to get you to do some interior artwork other than money, other than lots of
Yeah.
money, because I want any. So I thought, well, I'd do it, but a lot had happened to Transformers in the intervening years that I hadn't been following, so I didn't really know much about it. But then I said, well, something big, something with some gravitas, and obviously working with Simon. There's no point working with anyone else. So you were probably already having those conversations. So I
Mm.
suppose those pieces just
I
gradually came
think it
together.
all
It's probably why he asked me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it all just clicked in those, there was the G.I. Joe launch that had gone well for them. There was them wanting you to do some interior work, and me sort of knocking on the door in various ways about this, you know, continuation wrap up
Hmm.
for the original Marvel series. And there were obviously steps then afterwards where this 5 issue series suddenly became 20 issues or whatever it ended up. It was actually more than 20 issues.
Yeah.
And I think it was again to do with a real American hero, the G.I. Joe title,
Hmm.
which was going to hit its 200th
Wow. Yeah.
issue. And they wanted to marry up so that Regeneration One, which by the way wasn't our title,
No.
it was suggested to us strongly suggested to us by Andy and IDW as what they wanted it to be called.
Right. Yeah.
So happy with that. You can't imagine it as anything else now, really.
No, I mean the I guess the title you had, the War to End All Wars, would have been a very appropriate title, but it does sound just like another kind of story arc of the
Mm.
Transformers. But Regeneration One, I mean, it's a bit clever, isn't it? But it's got kind of good, it's a good marketing title. Because it's clever, it says what it is without necessarily referring to the story, but it's like, you know, it says
Yes.
what the project is in its broader scope. So pretty
Yeah.
clever, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would have been happy with whatever, but Regeneration One, once I sort of wrapped my head around it a bit, I really liked. I don't think I loved it when Andy first told me
Right.
that that was what it's going to be called, but then gradually it just sort of embeds in, and
Yeah, it does.
you're okay with that.
It doesn't sound like a title that you would have ever come up with. It's not a very Furman kind of title, is it?
No, no, but now, as I say, you can't imagine it not being called that. It
No.
feels so right.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, we anyway, we finally get the green light to work on this thing, and then we get two more things that happen. First of all, um, they decide to launch it on Free Comic Book Day 2012. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
Free Comic Book Day was a fairly new thing at the time.
Right.
And and it continues to this day. But yeah, they decided they would do so, we were constantly plotting things out and then having to replot because, oh look, we'd like you to do an 80.5, as we called it, issue
Yeah.
that sets the whole thing up and is going to be free and lots of people will get a copy of it because of that.
Mm.
And so suddenly we had to come up with, oh, well, we've got the first issue, so what can this issue be?
Mm.
And yeah, that became the first thing. And I was saying before the wider audience joined us that after, and I'm getting ahead of myself slightly here. After 80.5 came out, I on my blog did a detailed breakdown of the pages
Mm.
of each page of Regeneration One 80.5 before issue one came out. So hopefully it wasn't too spoilery, but it was the whole creative process behind that issue, which is one more thing we're going to make available to you wonderful Patreon people.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I mean, at the time, I suppose, because they weren't charging any money for the issue, if you were releasing spoilers, it kind of didn't really matter, does it?
No, I mean, and there was a gap of between May and July before issue one came out. So there was that nice sort of period to build a bit more anticipation for that first issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very good.
So yeah, then the next thing that happens is that the announcement is made at San Diego Comic Con
Mm.
2011.
Yeah.
So, it was a big deal. There were so many, Newsarama, particularly the comics news site, were really behind it. And, we have them to thank for a lot of that reader momentum with their
Mm.
petition and their news items. Chris Arendt, who used to work for Newsarama, was really supportive. So thank you, Chris.
Mm.
And,
Yeah,
just
definitely.
generally, there was a real sort of momentum and lots of pre-publicity behind it. And then yeah, IDW announced it at SDCC 2011.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was the first time that I knew how many issues it was going to be. I don't
Yeah.
think I knew until that announcement.
No, I mean, I'm not even totally sure when the announcement came out whether they knew it was going to be up to issue 100. I have a feeling it extended to fill that 100 space somewhere in between that and its
Yeah.
launch.
I seem to remember getting a call or a message or something from, again, I presume it's from Andy saying that it was all agreed and it was going to go ahead and it was going to be announced at San Diego, which was just before San Diego, I think. And he said to me, um, the good news is it's got the green light. Hasbro, etc., have all agreed to do it. I was like, oh, great. And then he said the bad news is you've got to finish at issue 100.
Yes.
Like, okay, is that bad news? I was like, I
No.
don't know whether he thought that we thought it was going to be an ongoing book, maybe, but I don't.
Mm,
I to that up until that point, I was always under the impression that it was only ever going to be the 5 issue thing.
yeah, me too. And the funny thing was, I wasn't sure I had enough story to take us to issue 100.
Be
If you think
careful what you
about
wish
it,
for. Yeah,
yeah, if you think about it, a 5 issue series would only taken us up to issue 86 or something in numbering terms.
yeah,
So, somewhere I had to find 14 more issues, plus, as it turned out, an issue 0 that got slotted in.
yeah.
It was like, wow, God, I'm going to need some more elements here. And I think that's when I started to think about pulling in elements from what was Generation 2 and
Mm,
sort of melding the two into a new whole continuation.
mm, mm,
But yeah, so that was the announcement at San Diego Comic Con 2011, and like I said, I just dug into my blog. Oh, gosh, there was a lot of stuff going on around that time. I hadn't realized that there were various other things, stepping outside of Regeneration One. I was just finishing up on Transformers Nefarious, which was a continuation or sequel to Revenge of the Fallen in comic book form.
mm.
So that was happening for IDW. With Death's Head was I'd done a short Death's Head story for a Panini Marvel Heroes comic that Simon Williams drew. So
Oh
I was
yeah,
actually writing some Death's Head again, which was wonderful. And the other thing that I kept seeing on my blog was I was reviewing comics on a thing called Comics Candy, which was uh, for a site called Total Sci-Fi Online. So
okay,
every month I had a budget to buy in new comics,
yeah,
read and review them for their site, which was great fun. I looked, but I couldn't find any of, I mean, I must have them somewhere, but I couldn't find any of the actual Total Sci-Fi Online review bits that had come out. But yeah, for a
mm.
good few months, I was sort of live reviewing comics.
All going on then. Blimey,
It
busy
was.
time.
And, you know, the other thing, again, conventions. It was it was one after the other in early 2012 before this launched.
Mm.
So I was at well, we were both at cons in Germany, the German Transformers convention.
Yeah, yeah,
I was at Norcon in Norwich, which we're going to later this year.
yeah.
There was Kapow, the first of the Mark Miller London conventions that
Oh yeah.
I think he did two of those in the end.
Mm.
And auto assembly. And it was like I was bouncing from one to the next. And then I went out to that year's BotCon as
Yeah,
well. So it was full on, yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's good. It's
Mm,
great, to for that kind of new thing to be coming out and to be able to make all those appearances because yeah, because the fans lap it up. Of course they do. They love hearing about what's going on, what's going to happen, what's coming up, how it happened, all that kind of thing. I wasn't. I don't think I was doing anything like that because I think I was in TV and stuff like that, and it was just a
mm,
whole different thing. Yeah, yeah, at the same time. So it was a bit of a balancing act for me. But I definitely wanted to do it. Definitely wanted to do Regeneration One, get back
mm,
into comics. The biggest thing I noticed had changed in the way I worked on that was because of my experience in TV, my panel layouts are very different to how they had been in the past. So that was a
mm.
noticeable difference. But
And it was interesting assembling the team, wasn't it? Because
oh
of
yeah,
obviously you and I were there, but you know, we kind of wanted Stephen back as well. and
Yeah.
IDW were fine with that. But and again, this is something we'll send out to the Patreon uh, listeners, viewers, is that we have the original tests that we got Stephen to do over your pencils for 80.5's cover.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it always made sense to get Stephen back onto it. The thing about Stephen, I mean, yes, he was part of the DNA, it's like it kind of had to be the three of us, given that there was a campaign to get it done. It's almost like, well, if they're campaigning to carry on from the Marvel thing, we need to do it, in a similar kind of way. I think Stephen's inking had become even more Stephen Baskerville over the years.
Yes.
So
Well,
that was kind of interesting.
there's a version 1 and a version 2 of Steve's test, which I've got. So obviously we looked at the first one, and I think you're right. We said it's a bit too Baskerville, and we'd like you to dial it back a bit to how it used to be,
Yeah.
and you'll see between the two that Stephen's such a great guy, and you know
Yeah.
he doesn't take offense, so he just did what we'd asked, and he sort of dialed back the sort of, because Stephen can be very, very rendered, can't he, with
Mm,
his inking,
mm,
and also he does his own art, so he's probably used to inking his own stuff in that
mm.
style.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with, back in the day, thinking about Stephen's inking, when we were doing Transformers, his style and my pencils, it kind of meshed really nicely, and it was a really good working relationship, and it was a bit more subtle than his kind of more recent stuff. But the reason that happened, because I noticed that happen when I started doing GI Joe, and then when Stephen started inking GI Joe, because I think my first few issues were not inked by him, if I remember rightly. Can't
Mhm.
remember, but anyway, his inking on GI Joe was very different to how he'd done Transformers, and that was largely because of the whole rise of what eventually became Image Comics. So Art T Bear at Marvel, not so much Scott Williams, but certainly Art T Bear at Marvel, who was inking Jim Lee and those guys,
Mhm.
on sort of X-Men books. He had that very kind of rendered pen and ink style, and Stephen loved that. I mean, it was the style of the day, and so Stephen went
Mm.
very much off in that direction with that kind of hatching, and kind of developed his own take on that. So. Um, and then we had a similar thing on Spider-Man 2099 when Stephen was inking that. Joey Cavalieri, the editor on it, said to Stephen, "Can you dial it back a bit?" Um, but I think it was just because of the times, the
Mm.
what was the trend. Um, Whereas because we were basically carrying on from issue 80 of Transformers, we needed to, yeah, kind of get it to look like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mean, you inked that cover anyway, didn't you, yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I always wanted to. I always have liked inking my own covers.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's just the opposite. I wouldn't have the time to ink a whole book. I have done some in the past, but inking the covers is, they usually kind of like that. So that's what I
But
wanted to
then
do.
we got Stephen going on the interiors, and that worked
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it did have that nice feel of, a continuation of style as well as of the story.
Because that was the thing. But I mean, in some ways, comics look a bit more generic than they used to. But back then, people had very distinctive styles. Um, and the way that myself and Stephen handled Transformers back in the day was very distinctively ours. It wasn't like
Mm,
anybody else's. So that was something that people had loved and campaigned for. So yeah, it made complete sense to kind of do that again.
yeah, absolutely. And then we came to the tricky business of not just finding a colorist, but settling on a coloring style for the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I originally wanted Jason Cardy to do it, and Jason did the covers
Mm.
because I wanted him to work on the book. Um, I don't. I think ultimately he said that he would love to do the covers, but he didn't have the time to do all the interiors. The reason I wanted Jason to do it is because having seen his work at conventions and having to got him, got to know him more through Draw the World Together and all that kind of thing. I just loved his work. Really, really liked his coloring
Mm.
style. And then when he couldn't do it, I thought, oh, what the hell are we going to do with this? And I wasn't really that aware of JP's work, to be
No.
honest, at the
And
time.
did Jason recommend JP? Is that the way it worked?
Oh God, I don't know. I can't remember. JP probably recommended himself.
Quite possibly. I mean, there's every chance we'd met and talked to
Yeah.
JP at conventions and things. So, JP, if you're listening to this, do remind us how the hell we got in touch with you about colouring Regeneration One in the first place.
Yeah, I think for him it was probably obvious. He was probably always saying, "I can do it. I could do it. I could do it. I could do it. I could do it." Whereas I,
Yes.
I wasn't really hearing that because I wasn't too much aware of his kind of past work, and I was aware of Jason, and he had done all that kind of stuff before. So,
Yeah.
but in
But
the
what
end,
a
it was like, what? Oh, okay, yeah, let's have a
yeah.
look at that.
Well, what a boon he turned out to be as well, because again, we
Oh,
went through
yes,
a lot of testing stages, didn't we, to get
yeah,
the the slightly retro look we wanted, but
yeah.
not to make it, just look like an old comic. It was a
No.
weird balancing act.
I mean, the thing about JP is that he's a proper workhorse. I mean, he knows his Transformers stuff completely inside out. He really, really knew the stuff, and that was one thing that was really, really good about it. But I think how adaptable he is, we showed up more and more and more. We were kind of pushing him towards a certain look. But then when he did the Zero issue, it's like he's completely capable of providing you with
Oh,
whatever you want. I mean,
well,
he's just like that, isn't he?
I
Consummate
mean,
professional in that sense.
we'll talk about the Zero issue maybe the next time we talk about Regeneration
Yeah.
One, but you're absolutely right. The Zero issue called for, I think, about five different coloring styles to match the eras, because it's a sort of one where the character jumps around through different bits of Transformers. And there's
Mm,
one that very much called for a slightly dotty looking,
yeah.
Original Marvel US color scheme.
Yeah. And
And
of course he did it.
he was equal to the task. Yeah, but I think we settled on a nice sort of balance between old school and modern computer coloring.
Yeah, I mean, I was really happy for Jason to go very contemporary in the coloring on
Mm.
the covers, just to really kind of sex it up, make it look like the movie poster of what was going on. Uh, the brief to JP was, which I'm sure he went, oh? when we said it was, okay, we don't want you to make. Obviously, the fans wanted to be a continuation of what it was, and we need to provide that, but we don't want you to color it exactly the way that Nell colored the old comics. We, I remember saying to him, I want you to color it the way that people remember that he did it when they remember it, but not when they actually look at it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, I knew what I meant, and he kind of grabbed onto that because things live in your memory in a different way than they actually were. I mean, you've only got to look at an old movie where you think, I remember it being so much better than that in its production values. So so it had to have that kind of original Marvel Transformers feel, but almost as though like it was a dream in its perfect version, but not
Mm,
too, because he, as some of the samples he sent in had a lot of texture on and things
mm.
like that. He says, no, no, don't do that. We just want color.
Yeah. Well, I think we said to him things like, if we're looking at outer space, we don't want it to look like a digital version of outer space, where
Yeah.
like the whole background is created in computer. We want it still to look like a colored, drawn version of outer space,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, because the way that we would do space back in the day when I was, when we were doing Transformers originally, and Stephen would have used the same technique as I used, because everybody did, which was you'd black, you'd make what the whole of the sky, the space background, you'd do it in black ink, maybe with some little planets that you'd drawn, so you didn't ink those in black, put a few little lines on and make them look like Jupiter or whatever. But then you'd get a toothbrush, dip it in some white paint, and just flick it onto the black background, so it was just
Mm,
spattered with white dots. And that was the perfect way to get a cosmic background.
yeah.
And that's
And it was
very,
that.
like you say, that's very different to how people would generate them now with computer software.
Absolutely. And, you know, computer digital art still was, to me, in its early stages at the time, some good, some bad,
Mm,
especially when it's like we're going to generate a whole sky or a whole background or something. So I think, again, I was just happier and more comfortable with a proper colored artwork sky, if you like.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because the thing about using computer generated coloring or textures or whatever is sometimes not so much with the sky backgrounds because they drop away anyway, but certainly within the drawing of characters and certainly with terrain when you get rocks and things like that, is if it's too computer generated, it can look like a photograph with black lines drawn around it.
Yeah.
And then it kind of breaks the mood a bit.
And yeah, we wanted that, cohesive look to the color as well as the artwork. And I think JP just rose to the challenge. And as you say, he's a real workhorse, but really, he really became, I suppose, an integral part of the team at
Mm,
that point, because
mm.
I can't imagine it now colored by anybody else. I think
No.
JP he really went that extra mile, didn't he? 100 miles or something on it.
Yeah, because he became part of the conversation because not only was he coloring it and doing that job, but he would pose questions to us. I mean, the first and most obvious question, which you'd probably considered, I hadn't, was like, so Soundwave, is it going to be purple or blue?
Mm,
And it's like, oh yeah, that is something that needs addressing.
yeah.
And that kind of thing cropped up every now and then. About the way I'd drawn things, he would say, well, on that character, this bit is certain color, but the way you've drawn it doesn't quite
Mm,
fit that. And so sometimes he would make little corrections on the artwork. But
yeah. I
yeah, he
mean,
was completely involved in it, and that was good.
yeah, it's good. He sort of kept us on track and on our toes as well about the detail that we might not have noticed, but the fans certainly would have noticed.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And also, just by complete contrast to the old Marvel stuff, which you didn't, which one wouldn't want to replicate, was because of the process that they now used back then, and the number of characters and the pressure of time. There would be sometimes there'd be clusters of characters which were just all knocked out in one color,
Mm,
which was fine back in the day. That was a technique. That was a way of, yeah, there are characters there, but they're not important to the
mm.
to the narrative. So you do that, whereas you wouldn't really get away with that now.
I'm struggling to remember whether maybe it's in that zero issue. I'm sure there's one where I asked JP to use that effect to knock characters back, a group of characters into the background.
Yeah,
I'll have to check it. We can talk about it again next time or the time after next.
yeah,
But I'm sure there was one, and it's possibly that one that references the Bob Budiansky story, Car Wash of Doom, where I'd asked JP to use those Nell knockout color effects
yeah.
on some background characters.
Knockout Nell. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was the master
Anyway,
of
yes.
knockout. Yeah,
So, I mean, really, like I say, we've hardly got to the launch because uh, Free Comic Book Day 2012 rolls around. We all go to Orbital Comics to do a signing.
Do we?
Yes, there we go. You see, hadn't remembered that,
Did,
but all
did I
four of
enjoy it?
us. Doubtful. No, no,
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure
do.
you
I
did.
do remember that. Yeah, we were
Yeah,
all lined up at a very high table, weren't we?
that's right. Yeah, and it was all four of us, JP, Stephen, you, and me.
Mm,
And that was great. I mean, for a start, it was a guaranteed busy day, free comic book day. And we were signing free comics. So
yeah,
there was every chance we were going to be really busy, and we were,
and we were. Yeah, they were queuing out the door, weren't they?
which was which was a really good. And Orbital was such a great friendly shop to sign in anyway.
Orbit. That's the comic that we couldn't remember the name of a couple of
Exactly.
episodes ago. Orbital Comics.
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
Orbital. Yeah, no, and that was great. That all my favorite in-store signings were there just because the staff looked after us so well and they were such
Mm,
lovely people.
mm.
But yeah, so that was the first thing, and then July the 11th is when issue 81 came out, the
Wow.
the first issue, 2012, and very shortly after that, I was at BotCon, which was in Dallas.
Mm.
And that was the year, apart from the fact, obviously, we were promoting Regeneration One, that was the year I was inducted into Hasbro's Transformers Hall of Fame.
All right.
And
Okay.
and it happened, you know, possibly one of the most memorable moments of my career was of being on a stage in front of a very big audience and
Yeah.
accepting this award. I felt like I was at the Oscars. Aaron Archer gave me this little statuette, very much like an Oscar of Optimus Prime,
Yeah.
and there were a good 1,500 people or
Nice.
more in this big auditorium, and they're applauding, and I have to make a speech. And honestly, it was, I've done a lot of conventions, but this one was slightly humbling, if you like. It just
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
it was lovely. Maybe when we do the next one, I'll bring the little statuette and wave it in front of the camera. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was just an amazing year. And like I say, so many conventions. Kapow, London Super Comic Con, Auto Assembly, cons,
Mm.
Norcon. I mean, honestly, it was flat out. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. You need to tell us more about the award. Maybe we could that's where we could start next time. How about
Yeah, I
that?
think we will. And, it's probably about time to wrap things up for this one. So we will jump back onto this, probably episode 26,
Hmm.
because episode 25 is our 1 year anniversary episode. And
Yeah.
we can now announce to the world at large that our first special guest is,
Am I saying it?
you're saying it, come on.
Ian Rimmer.
Ian Rimmer, who was editor on Transformers UK after Sheila Cranner and was around in those very formative months before I was involved. So we'll have some lovely insights about the very, very early stages of Transformers UK.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I think I said before, I don't ever remember meeting him, but somebody who was there right at the very beginning will be fascinating, and
Yeah.
also just to hear about what he's done since then. Be really good.
Absolutely. And, he's one of the unsung heroes,
Yeah,
really, because, there's a good case for saying Transformers UK comic would not have been as successful as it was without Ian coming on board as editor and sort of revamping things a little bit. So
yeah.
I think you're really going to enjoy our 25th episode.
Yeah, fantastic. In 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, well, we look forward to seeing you then, and then join us back here after that for more Regeneration One
Yeah.
reminiscing.
Regeneration One, two.
Yes. Yeah, we could tie ourselves up in knots in this.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's
brilliant.
great.
Yeah.
Thanks as always, Andrew.
Yes, Simon, that was great. Yeah, really enjoyed that. Look forward to the next one with Ian. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to The Rest is Giant Robots. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing for more and maybe share with like-minded friends. This has been a Wildfur production.